The crimson dust of Coal Dust Ridge hung in the evening air like dried blood, coating every surface of the Wyoming frontier town with its persistent embrace. The sun, a dying ember on the horizon, cast long shadows through the gaps between weathered buildings, while the wind whistled its lonesome song through the rocky gorges that cradled this forgotten corner of civilization. Ruby Lark stood at the grimy window of her second-floor room in the Daisy Bell Saloon, watching the street below transform from dusty brown to deep amber in the failing light. At 24, she possessed the kind of beauty that had been worn down by hard living, like a river stone, still lovely but smoothed by constant friction. Her auburn hair, pinned up in the fashion expected of her profession, caught the last rays of sunlight, though her green eyes held no warmth to match. 10 years. 10 years since her father had stumbled into this very establishment, drunk on cheap whiskey and false promises, and traded his 14-year-old daughter to settle a gambling debt. 10 years of painted smiles, hollow laughter, and learning to separate her mind from her body when the work demanded it. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, leaving a brief impression that quickly faded, much like she hoped to fade from this place in a few weeks' time. Once she'd saved enough coin. "Ruby," the sharp voice of Madame Violet pierced through her reverie. "Get yourself presentable. We've got a special arrangement tonight." Ruby turned from the window, her movements practiced and graceful despite the weariness that seemed to live in her very bones. Madame Violet stood in the doorway, her substantial frame corseted into a burgundy dress that had seen better decades. The older woman's face, heavily powdered and rouged, bore an expression somewhere between motherly concern and business calculation. "What kind of arrangement?" Ruby asked, though she already knew. Special arrangements always meant the same thing. Someone with money wanted privacy, wanted to pretend they weren't paying for what they were about to do. "The new sheriff," Violet said, adjusting the feathers in her graying hair. "Eli Ward. Came in earlier, asking specifically for someone who could provide pleasant company for the evening. Nothing crude, he insisted, just dinner and conversation at his place." Ruby's fingers stilled on the buttons of her work dress. The new sheriff. She'd seen him around town these past 2 weeks since he'd taken over for old Sheriff Daniels, who'd been found with a bullet in his back after poking too deep into some unsavory business. This Eli Ward cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with the bearing of a man who'd seen his share of violence and chosen to stand against it rather than join it. "He asked for me specifically." "Asked for someone respectable-looking," Violet said with a snort. "Said he wanted a lady who could hold a conversation. I figured you'd fit the bill better than the others, what with your reading and all." Ruby's ability to read was an open secret in the Daisy Bell, one of the few things her mother had managed to teach her before consumption took her. It set Ruby apart from the other girls, made her useful for reading letters to those who couldn't, or helping with the saloon's books when Violet's eyes grew too weak in the lamplight. "How much?" Ruby asked, already calculating how many more nights like this she'd need before she could buy a train ticket east. $20 for the evening. He was quite generous. Violet's eyes narrowed slightly. "You treat him right." "Ruby, a lawman's goodwill is worth more than gold in a town like this." Ruby nodded, moving to her wash basin. The water was lukewarm, but she scrubbed her face clean of the day's paint before applying a lighter touch of rouge and kohl. For men who wanted to pretend, less was always more. She selected her best dress, a deep blue cotton that had only a few carefully mended tears, its modest neckline suggesting rather than displaying. As she dressed, Ruby caught sight of herself in the cracked mirror. For a moment, she saw not the saloon girl she'd become, but the ghost of the girl she'd been, the one who'd once dreamed of teaching letters to children, of having a small house with morning glories growing up the porch posts. She blinked, and the ghost vanished, leaving only Ruby Lark, who knew better than to dream. The walk to the sheriff's residence took her past the usual evening crowd. Cowboys fresh off the trail, their spurs jingling against the wooden sidewalks. Miners with coal dust ground so deep into their skin it would never wash clean. Good wives hurrying home before full dark, clutching their baskets and avoiding eye contact with women like Ruby. She kept her shawl pulled tight and her eyes forward, moving with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd learned that being noticed rarely ended well. The sheriff had taken up residence in an old warehouse at the edge of town, converted into living quarters by its previous occupant, a merchant who'd fled when the silver vein played out. It stood apart from the other buildings, solid and unadorned, much like the man who now called it home. Ruby paused at the door, steeling herself for whatever version of dinner and conversation awaited inside. Her knock was answered quickly. Eli Ward filled the doorframe, and Ruby found herself having to look up to meet his eyes, something that didn't happen often with her height. He was perhaps 35, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from years under the western sun. His face was clean-shaven, unusual for these parts, revealing a strong jaw and a thin scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as a winter storm, holding something she couldn't quite name. "Miss Lark," he said, stepping aside. "Thank you for coming." The formality of it threw her. Most men grabbed what they wanted the moment the door closed, but Eli Ward simply gestured her inside, maintaining a respectful distance that made the hair on her arms stand up with its unfamiliarity. The interior surprised her, clean, sparse, but somehow warm. A table set for two with actual china plates. A pot simmering on the stove that filled the air with the scent of beef stew and fresh bread. Books, actual books, lined one wall, their spines reflecting the lamplight. "You cook." The words escaped before Ruby could stop them. A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Army teaches a man to make do. Please, sit." Ruby lowered herself into one of the chairs, her movements careful, controlled. This felt like a trap, though she couldn't say why. Men didn't feed the women they paid for. They didn't pull out chairs or pour water into clean glasses with steady hands. "I hope you're hungry," Eli said, ladling stew into bowls. "I'm afraid my cooking's nothing fancy, but it's filling." "It smells wonderful," Ruby said truthfully. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten something that hadn't come from the saloon's kitchen, where everything tasted of old grease and resignation. They ate in relative silence at first, Ruby waiting for him to make his move, to show his true colors. But Eli seemed content to focus on his meal, occasionally glancing at her with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see too much. "You were a soldier," she finally said, needing to fill the strange quiet. "Union Army. Sergeant with the 2nd Colorado Infantry." He set down his spoon. "Spent most of the war fighting Confederates and my own conscience in equal measure. And now you're fighting outlaws in Coal Dust Ridge. Someone needs to." His expression darkened. "Your former sheriff was onto something when he died. Girls going missing from towns all along the rail line. Not many people care when they're—" He paused, seeming to search for the right word. "Whores?" Ruby supplied, her voice flat. "Women," he corrected firmly. "Women who deserve justice same as anyone else." Ruby studied him over the rim of her water glass. Either he was the best actor she'd ever encountered, or he actually meant it. "Is that why I'm here? You need information about the missing girls?" "No." He leaned back in his chair. "You're here because I've been in this town 2 weeks, and every time I see you, you're looking out that window like a caged bird planning its escape. Figured you might appreciate an evening where you could just be yourself." The words hit her like a physical blow. Ruby set down her glass before her shaking hands could betray her. "You don't know anything about me. I know you read to Widow Henderson when her eyes pain her. I know you slip food to those Mexican children behind the general store when you think no one's looking. I know you've been saving every penny you can hide from Violet, probably planning to run." He paused. "And I know you deserve better than the hand you've been dealt." Ruby stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "If you're not interested in what you paid for, Sheriff, I should go. Stay." It wasn't an order, more of a request. "Please, just finish your meal. Talk with me a while. That's all I want." Against her better judgment, Ruby sat back down. They talked as the evening deepened, about books he'd read during the long nights between battles, about the places she dreamed of seeing beyond the Rocky Mountains. He asked her opinion on everything from the town's new schoolhouse to the territorial government's policies, listening to her answers as if they mattered. When the clock struck 10, Ruby knew she should leave. Violet would be wondering, and staying too long would raise questions. She stood, and this time, Eli didn't protest. He walked her to the door, then paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand. Confused, Ruby placed her hand in his. His fingers were calloused from years of handling guns and reins, but his touch was gentle as he raised her hand to his lips. The kiss he placed there was barely a whisper, a brush of warmth against her knuckles, but it sent a shock through her entire body. Not desire, she knew desire, had learned to fake it and endure it. This was something else entirely, something that made her want to run and stay in equal measure. "Thank you for the evening, Miss Lark," he said, releasing her hand. Ruby fled into the night, her thoughts in turmoil. She'd been prepared for anything: violence, demands, the usual degradation dressed up in prettier clothes. She hadn't been prepared for kindness, for respect, for a kiss on the hand that somehow felt more intimate than anything she'd experienced in 10 years of selling her body. Back in her room at the Daisy Bell, Ruby pressed her back against the closed door and tried to calm her racing heart. $20 lay on her dresser, Violet's cut already taken, but for once, the money seemed unimportant. She could still feel the warmth of his lips on her skin, still see those gray eyes looking at her like she was something more than what she'd been forced to become. It was dangerous, this feeling. Hope was a luxury women like her couldn't afford. But as Ruby readied herself for bed, she found herself touching the spot on her hand where Eli Ward had placed that gentle kiss, wondering what game he was playing, and why part of her hoped it wasn't a game at all. The morning after her evening with Sheriff Ward, Ruby sat on the edge of her narrow bed, braiding her hair, while Lila May, her roommate, chattered away about the previous night's customers. The small room they shared above the saloon smelled of lavender water and stale perfume, with sunlight filtering through the faded calico curtains. "That railroad man from Denver was back," Lila May said, pinning up her blonde curls. "Kept going on about his wife and children back home while his hands were all over me. The usual story." She glanced at Ruby in the mirror. "How was your special arrangement? Violet said you got the new sheriff." Ruby focused on her braid, keeping her voice neutral. "It was fine. He wanted dinner." "Just dinner?" Lila May turned, her painted eyebrows rising. "That's peculiar. Most lawmen I've known wanted their money's worth and then some. He was different." Ruby couldn't bring herself to mention the kiss, that gentle press of lips against her hand that had kept her awake half the night. It felt too private, too precious to share in this room where secrets were currency and privacy was a myth. "Different how? Did he hurt you?" Concern flickered across Lila May's face, despite the competition between the girls for the best-paying customers. Genuine friendship existed in these small moments. "No, nothing like that. He was a gentleman." The word felt strange on Ruby's tongue. When was the last time she'd used it without irony? Lila May snorted. "A gentleman who pays for women's company. That's a new one." Ruby stood to dress, effectively ending the conversation. But as she went about her morning routine, helping in the kitchen, mending torn stockings, reading yesterday's newspaper aloud to old Pete, the half-blind bartender, her thoughts kept drifting to gray eyes and scarred hands that had touched her with unexpected reverence. By afternoon, the Daisy Bell was filling with its usual crowd. Ruby served drinks, deflected wandering hands with practiced ease, and tried not to look toward the door every time it opened. She was being foolish. One evening of conversation didn't mean anything. Men like Eli Ward didn't form attachments to women like her. But then he walked in. The saloon's noise seemed to dim as Eli Ward entered, his broad frame filling the doorway. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair touched with early silver at the temples. His badge caught the light as he moved to a corner table, not the bar where most men conducted their drinking, but a quiet spot with a clear view of both entrances. Ruby felt Violet's elbow in her ribs. Go see what the sheriff wants, and remember what I said about keeping lawmen happy. Ruby made her way across the room, aware of the eyes following her progress. Some customers looked curious, others wary. A sheriff in a saloon could mean trouble or opportunity, depending on which side of the law you favored. Sheriff Ward, she said, keeping her voice professionally pleasant. What can I get you? Coffee, if you have it. Black. He looked up at her, and again she was struck by the directness of his gaze. And a moment of your time when you're able. I'm working. I'll wait. True to his word. He nursed that single cup of coffee for 2 hours, occasionally pulling out a small notebook to write in, but mostly just observing. Ruby felt his eyes on her as she moved through the room, but it wasn't the leering wait she was used to. It was protective. She served drinks to a group of cowboys fresh off the trail, and when one grabbed her waist, pulling her into his lap, she saw Eli's hand move to his sidearm. The cowboy released her quickly enough when she applied her knee where it counted, but the sheriff's readiness to intervene left her unsettled. During a lull, she approached his table. You're making my customers nervous. Good. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. Sit. I told you, I'm working, and I'm investigating. He pulled out his notebook. 3 girls have gone missing from establishments like this along the rail line. Sarah Jenkins from Laramie, Maria Santos from Cheyenne, Kate O'Brien from Medicine Bow, all within the last 6 months. Despite herself, Ruby sank into the chair. Kate? Red-haired Kate with a scar on her chin. You knew her? We worked together in Cheyenne before I came here. She talked about saving enough to bring her sister out from Boston. Ruby's throat tightened. When did she? 2 months ago. Last seen getting into a fancy carriage with a man in a black coat. No one could describe him clearly. Eli leaned forward. Ruby, I need to know if you've seen anyone like that here. Anyone asking about girls who might be willing to travel for private work. Ruby's mind raced. There had been men. There always were, making promises about better establishments in San Francisco or Denver, but one in particular. There was a man, about a month ago, well-dressed, soft-spoken, had an accent, maybe English. He talked to several of the girls about exclusive arrangements with wealthy gentlemen back east. Did he approach you? Briefly, but Violet ran him off, said she didn't like his look. Ruby shivered. I thought she was just being protective of her income. Eli wrote quickly in his notebook. Would you recognize him if you saw him again? Maybe. He had very pale eyes, like winter sky, and his hands. She paused, remembering. His hands were too soft. Even gamblers and dandies out here have some calluses. His were like a baby's. Good, that's good. Eli closed the notebook. If he comes back, or anyone like him, you find a way to let me know. Don't approach them. Don't let on you're suspicious. Just get word to me. Why do you care? The question escaped before Ruby could stop it. Most lawmen wouldn't bother about missing working girls. Eli was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight. My sister ran away when she was 15, found her way into a brothel in St. Louis. By the time I tracked her down, he stopped, pain flickering across his features. She was dead, consumption, they said, but I knew better. She'd written me letters, told me about the beatings, the laudanum they forced on the girls to keep them compliant. I couldn't save her, but maybe I can save someone else's sister. Ruby's chest constricted. She'd heard countless sob stories from men trying to justify their presence in places like the Daisy Bell, but this had the ring of truth. I'm sorry about your sister. Her name was Rebecca. She wanted to be a teacher, too. His eyes met hers. Like you. How did you? The way you hold a book. The care you take with words. My sister was the same. He stood, leaving coins on the table for the coffee. Be careful, Ruby. These men, whoever they are, they're dangerous. He left then, but his presence lingered. Ruby went back to work, but found herself hyper-aware of every stranger who entered. every conversation that seemed out of place. As evening dissolved into night, the saloon grew rowdy, with miners spending their weekly pay. Ruby navigated the chaos with practiced ease, but her thoughts kept returning to missing girls and soft-handed men with winter eyes. Near midnight, trouble erupted. A drunk miner named Josiah Briggs had been pawing at young Daisy, barely 17 and new to the life. When she tried to pull away, he backhanded her, sending her sprawling across a table. Before Ruby could intervene, the saloon door slammed open. Eli Ward stood there like judgment incarnate. The room fell silent except for Daisy's quiet sobs. "Briggs." Eli's voice was deadly calm. "Step away from the girl. Ain't no law against disciplining a whore what won't do her job." Briggs slurred, but his hand moved toward his gun. Eli was faster. In one fluid motion, he crossed the room, disarmed Briggs, and had him face down on the floor with a knee in his back. "There's law against assault. There's law against disturbing the peace. And in my town, there's law against treating any woman like property." He yanked Briggs to his feet. "You're spending the night in jail." "Tomorrow, you'll apologize to Miss Daisy and pay for her doctor's fees, or you'll be on the next train out of Coal Dust Ridge." As he marched Briggs out, Eli's eyes found Ruby across the room. A slight nod, then he was gone, leaving the saloon in stunned silence. "Well," Violet said after a moment, "seems we got ourselves a different kind of lawman." Ruby helped Daisy to their room, cleaning the cut on her lip and holding her while she cried. But even as she comforted the younger girl, Ruby's mind was on Eli Ward, a man who saw working girls as people worth protecting, who carried his own ghosts, who kissed hands instead of taking what he'd paid for. Later, alone in the darkness of her room with Lila May snoring softly nearby, Ruby allowed herself to think about what it might mean. She'd spent 10 years building walls around her heart, learning to feel nothing, expect nothing. But Eli Ward was methodically dismantling those walls with every unexpected kindness, every look that saw her instead of what she did for money. Through her window, she could see the sheriff's office, a lamp still burning despite the late hour. Was he thinking about the missing girls? About his sister? About her? Ruby pressed her fingers to the spot on her hand where he'd kissed her, that small gesture that had shaken her more than any passionate embrace. She'd been saving to run, to start fresh somewhere where no one knew what she'd been. But for the first time in 10 years, Ruby Lark found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, she had a reason to stay. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows and sending dust devils dancing down the empty street. Change was coming to Coal Dust Ridge, whether in the form of dangerous men hunting desperate women or a sheriff who saw humanity where others saw only shame. Ruby closed her eyes and made a decision. She would help Eli Ward catch whoever was taking the girls, and maybe, in the process, she'd find out if the hope flickering in her chest was foolishness or the first spark of a different life altogether. The whispers started 3 days after Eli arrested Josiah Briggs. Ruby first noticed them at the general store when Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, pulled her skirts aside rather than risk them brushing against Ruby's. Then came the looks, some pitying, some scandalized, all knowing. By week's end, everyone in Coal Dust Ridge seemed to know that their new sheriff was sweet on a saloon girl. Ruby tried to ignore it, focusing on her work and the information Eli had shared about the missing women. She'd started paying closer attention to the men who frequented the Daisy Bell, particularly those who seemed too interested in which girls had no family, which ones were saving to leave town. But the weight of the town's judgment pressed down on her like the summer heat that had descended on the valley. "He was in here again yesterday," Violet said one afternoon. "Counting the previous night's take. 3rd time this week. Only orders coffee. Only talks to you. He's investigating the disappearances." Violet's laugh was harsh. "Is that what they're calling it now? Listen, girl, I've run this place for 15 years. I know when a man's smitten, and Sheriff Ward's got it bad. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Before Ruby could answer, shouting erupted from the street. They rushed to the window to see Eli faced off against a group of town councilmen led by banker Horace Pemberton. a man whose public piety was matched only by his private visits to the rooms upstairs. "It's unseemly, Sheriff," Pemberton was saying, his face red with indignation. "Your association with that establishment is bringing shame upon your office." "My investigation requires me to protect all citizens of Coal Dust Ridge," Eli replied, his voice steady but with an edge that made Ruby's heart race. "Including the women who work at the Daisy Bell. Those aren't women, they're—" "Careful, Mr. Pemberton." Eli stepped closer to the banker. "I'd hate for your wife to learn about your Tuesday afternoon appointments upstairs." "Room 3, isn't it? With Miss Lila May?" Pemberton sputtered, backing away. The other councilmen looked uncomfortable, several having their own secrets within the Daisy Bell's walls. They dispersed with muttered threats about town meetings and proper conduct, leaving Eli standing alone in the dusty street. Ruby watched him run a hand through his hair, shoulders tense with frustration. Without thinking, she grabbed her shawl and slipped out the back door, circling around to approach him from the side street. "You shouldn't defend me," she said softly. "It's only making things worse for you." Eli turned, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "Ruby, Thunder rumbled overhead, cutting him off. The sky had darkened while they'd been talking, heavy clouds rolling in from the mountains. "Storm coming," he said. "Let me walk you back. I can manage." "I know you can, but I'd like to anyway." They'd made it halfway when the sky opened. Rain fell in sheets, turning the street to mud in seconds. Eli grabbed Ruby's hand, pulling her into the nearest shelter, the old livery stable, abandoned since the owner died last winter. They stood in the doorway, soaked and breathing hard, still holding hands. "We should talk," Eli said, rain dripping from his hair. "About what's happening, about us." "There is no us." Ruby tried to pull her hand away, but he held firm. "You're the sheriff. I'm a saloon girl. That's all there can be." "Is it?" He turned her hand over, tracing the lines of her palm with his thumb. "Because I can't stop thinking about you. About that first night, when you looked at me like I'd handed you the moon instead of just dinner." "Stop!" Ruby's voice broke. "Please, don't you understand? This fantasy you have, it ends with you losing your position and me losing what little safety I've carved out for myself. The town won't stand for it. Damn the town." His free hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away rain or tears. She wasn't sure which. "Ruby, I've spent years doing what's expected, what's proper. I married a woman I didn't love because our families approved. I watched her die trying to give me a child neither of us really wanted. I joined the army because it was honorable. I killed boys barely old enough to shave because someone told me they were the enemy. I'm tired of living for everyone else's expectations." Ruby closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite herself. "You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what I've done, what I've had to do to survive. I know you've survived." "That's what matters. I've let men—" She couldn't finish, shame choking the words. "You did what you had to do. It doesn't change who you are inside." His forehead touched hers. "The woman who reads to blind bartenders and feeds hungry children. The woman who looks out windows and dreams of something more. That's who I see." The storm raged outside, but in the shelter of the abandoned stable, time seemed to pause. Ruby felt herself trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in a decade. "Eli," she whispered, and then his lips were on hers. It wasn't the practiced seduction she knew, all technique and no feeling. This was raw, desperate, a clash of loneliness and hope that left her gasping. His hands tangled in her wet hair, and she clutched his shirt, holding on like he might disappear if she let go. When they broke apart, both breathing raggedly, Ruby saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "Come home with me," he said roughly. "Not for money, not for information, just be with me." Every practical part of Ruby screamed warnings, but the girl who'd once dreamed of morning glories won out. She nodded. They ran through the rain to his warehouse home, arriving soaked and laughing with the absurdity of it. Inside, Eli built up the fire while Ruby stood shivering, uncertain now that the moment had passed. "There are dry clothes in the bedroom," he said without turning. "Some of my sister's things I kept. They might fit." Ruby found the clothes, a simple cotton dress and undergarments, carefully preserved. She changed quickly, her hands shaking. When she returned, Eli had changed too, and set out towels by the fire. They sat on the floor, backs against the sofa, not touching but aware of every inch between them. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "I'm frightened," Ruby admitted. "Of me? Of hoping." She pulled her knees to her chest. "Of believing this could be real. That you could actually want me for more than—" "I want you for everything," he interrupted. "Your thoughts, your dreams, your past, your future, all of it. My past is ugly. So is mine." He stared into the fire. "I've done things in the name of duty that haunt me. Burned homes with families possibly still inside. Shot men who were probably just defending their land. The badge doesn't wash that clean." They talked then, really talked. About the war, about her father's betrayal, about his sister's death, about her stolen dreams. The storm passed, but they remained by the fire, sharing pieces of themselves they'd never shown anyone else. When Ruby finally dozed off, her head on his shoulder, Eli carefully lifted her to the bedroom. She woke as he settled her on the bed. "Stay," she whispered, catching his hand. "Ruby?" "Not for that. Just hold me, please. I'm so tired of being alone." He lay beside her, gathering her against his chest. Ruby listened to his heartbeat, felt the rise and fall of his breathing, and for the first time in 10 years, felt safe. She woke near dawn to find him watching her, his face soft in the gray light. "No regrets?" she asked. "None." He brushed hair from her face. "You? Ask me when the town finds out. They already know, or suspect. Might as well give them something real to talk about." "Eli, be serious." "I am." He sat up, pulling her with him. "Ruby, I'm not asking you to change overnight. Keep working if you want. God knows I can't support you on a sheriff's salary yet, but give us a chance. Let me court you properly." "Court me?" She laughed, but it was watery. "Eli, I'm not a courting kind of woman. You are to me." The simplicity of it broke something in her. She kissed him then, pouring all her fear and hope into it. When they pulled apart, she saw her answer in his eyes. "All right," she whispered. "But when this ends badly, it won't." "When it does," she insisted. "Don't say I didn't warn you." Eli walked her back to the Daisy Bell as the sun rose, his hand properly on her elbow, but his thumb stroking small circles that made her shiver. At the back door, he kissed her again, brief but thorough. "Tonight?" he asked. "I'm working. After—" She nodded, not trusting her voice. As she slipped inside, Ruby caught sight of Mrs. Patterson across the street, her face a mask of righteous horror. By noon, everyone would know that Ruby Lark had spent the night at the sheriff's house. But climbing the stairs to her room, Ruby found she didn't care as much as she thought she would. The memory of Eli's arms around her, of being held like something precious rather than something purchased, was worth any amount of scandal. She was playing with fire, she knew, but for the first time in 10 years, Ruby Lark was willing to risk getting burned. The special meeting of the Coal Dust Ridge Town Council convened on a Tuesday afternoon, the air in the small courthouse thick with tobacco smoke and disapproval. Ruby watched from the back row, having slipped in quietly despite Eli's protests that she shouldn't subject herself to this. "The matter before us," Horace Pemberton intoned from his seat at the council table, "is the conduct unbecoming of our sheriff and whether it compromises his ability to serve this community." Eli stood at the front, badge gleaming, back straight as a soldier's. He'd worn his best shirt, Ruby noticed, the dark blue one that made his eyes look like storm clouds. "Sheriff Ward," Mayor Thompson began, clearly uncomfortable with the proceedings. You've done fine work since arriving. That business with the cattle thieves, keeping the peace on Saturday nights. But this association with Miss—" he cleared his throat, "with certain elements of our community has raised concerns. My personal associations have not interfered with my duties." Eli said calmly, "Crime is down, the streets are safer, and I'm making progress on the investigation into the missing women." "Missing whores." Councilman Fletcher spat. "Wasting town resources on trash that probably ran off with the first smooth talker who promised them easy money." Ruby's hands clenched in her lap. Beside her, Widow Henderson patted her arm gently. "3 women are missing, possibly dead." Eli's voice hardened. "Their profession doesn't make their lives worth less." "Doesn't it?" Pemberton stood, addressing the packed courtroom rather than Eli. "Sheriff Ward has been seen entering and leaving the Daisy Bell at all hours. He's been observed in intimate circumstances with one of the women there. How can we trust a lawman who consorts with the very element he should be controlling?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ruby caught fragments. Shameful, corrupting influence. His poor dead wife. Furthermore, Pemberton continued, warming to his theme, "We have testimonies that Miss Ruby Lark spent the entire night at the sheriff's residence during the last week's storm. What kind of example does this set for our children, our young men? A better example than the one you set every Tuesday afternoon," Eli said quietly. The courtroom erupted. Pemberton's face went purple. Mayor Thompson banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! Sheriff Ward, that's enough. Mr. Pemberton, please continue." "I move," Pemberton said through clenched teeth, "that Sheriff Ward be given a choice. End his sordid association with that woman immediately, or tender his resignation. Coal Dust Ridge deserves a lawman above reproach." Ruby couldn't breathe. She started to rise, to leave before she heard the inevitable. But Widow Henderson's surprisingly strong grip held her in place. "Stay," the old woman whispered. "See what he's made of." Eli was silent for a long moment, studying the faces of the council. Then he reached up and unpinned his badge. "No," Ruby breathed. "If this town requires me to choose between my badge and my conscience," Eli said, setting the star on the table, "then the choice is already made. I won't abandon someone I care about to satisfy your hypocrisy. Think carefully." "Sheriff," Mayor Thompson warned, "you're throwing away your career for a woman who what?" Eli's control finally snapped. "Who's shown more courage surviving 10 years of hell than most of you have shown in your entire comfortable lives? Who risks her safety to help me investigate crimes you'd rather pretend don't exist? Who has more integrity in her little finger than half this council combined?" He turned, his eyes finding Ruby in the crowd. "Yes, I care for Ruby Lark. If that makes me unfit to serve, so be it. But I'll warn you now, badge or no badge, if any harm comes to her or any woman in this town because of your prejudice, you'll answer to me." Eli strode out, leaving chaos in his wake. Ruby sat frozen until Widow Henderson pushed her. "Go after him, girl, go!" Ruby fled, pushing through the crowd outside the courthouse. She found Eli at the edge of town, standing by the cemetery where his predecessor lay buried. "You fool," she said, voice breaking. "You absolute fool. I told you this would happen." He turned, and the raw emotion on his face stopped her cold. "Did you think I'd choose differently?" he asked. "Did you think a piece of tin was worth more to me than you? Your career, I'll find other work, maybe not as a lawman, but honest work exists." "Eli, I'm not worth—" He crossed to her in 2 strides, crushing her against him. Don't you dare say you're not worth it." They held each other there among the wooden crosses and prairie grass, while the town buzzed with scandal behind them. That night, Ruby made a decision. She found Violet in her office, counting money as always. "I'm sorry," Ruby said, placing her savings on the desk, "but I need to leave." Violet looked up sharply. "Because of him? Because staying will only hurt him more. He gave up everything, and I can't be the reason his life is ruined. Sit down, girl." Ruby sat, surprised by the gentleness in Violet's voice. 22 years ago, Violet said. I loved a man, a banker, respectable, married. He promised to leave his wife, to take me away. I believed him. When I told him I was carrying his child, he gave me money for a doctor and never spoke to me again. Ruby had never heard this story. Violet never talked about her past. I lost the baby anyway, Violet continued. Lost my chance at respectability, too. Been running this place ever since, watching girls like you come through, all thinking they're not worth real love. She pushed Ruby's money back. That man out there gave up his badge for you. Don't you dare run from that. But, no buts. You want to leave the life. I understand. But you leave with him, not from him. A commotion outside interrupted them. Shouts, breaking glass, the thunder of hooves. Ruby and Violet rushed to the window to see armed riders circling the saloon. Fire! The sheriff's place is on fire! Ruby ran, her feet flying over the wooden sidewalks. She could see the glow before she rounded the corner, Eli's warehouse home engulfed in flames. A crowd had gathered, some forming a bucket brigade, but the fire was too far gone. Where is he? Ruby grabbed the nearest person. Where's Eli? Haven't seen him. Miss... Panic clawed at her throat. Then strong arms caught her from behind. I'm here, Eli said in her ear. I'm all right. I was at the telegraph office. She turned in his arms, running her hands over him to assure herself he was unharmed. Your home, your books, just things... He cupped her face. Are you hurt? They didn't touch the saloon? No, Understanding dawned. This was a warning, or revenge, or both. His jaw tightened. But they made a mistake. I sent that telegraph to the U.S. Marshal in Cheyenne. If the town doesn't want me as sheriff, fine, but I'm not stopping the investigation. The fire brigade had given up saving the structure, focusing on keeping the flames from spreading. Ruby and Eli stood watching his life burn, her hand in his. What will you do now? She asked quietly. Find somewhere else to sleep. Keep investigating. Figure out how to court you properly without a home to invite you to. Despite everything, Ruby laughed. Eli Ward, your house is burning down and you're thinking about courting? My priorities are clear. He squeezed her hand. Question is, what will you do? This was a message to both of us. Ruby thought about Violet's story, about chances lost to fear, about Eli standing in that courthouse, choosing her over everything else, about the missing girls who deserved justice even if the town didn't want to give it. I'll help you, she said firmly, with the investigation, and with the rest of it too. The rest of it? The courting. Though Lord knows how that works when the man has no house and the woman lives in a brothel. We'll figure it out. He pulled her closer as the warehouse roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. We've gotten this far. The next morning, Eli took a room at the boarding house run by Mrs. Chen, the Chinese woman whose laundry he'd defended from vandals months earlier. It wasn't much, but it was clean and safe, and Mrs. Chen was one of the few people in town who didn't care about scandal. Ruby, for her part, threw herself into the investigation. She compiled lists of every girl who'd left suddenly in the past year, every stranger who'd shown too much interest in the working girl's circumstances. She remembered details others had forgotten, patterns others had missed. And 3 days after the fire, she found their first real lead. Lily Morgan, she told Eli, spreading papers across his small table. Left 6 months ago, supposedly to marry a rancher near Casper, but I remembered something. She couldn't read, so I helped her with a letter that came. It wasn't from a rancher. Who was it from? A company, Hightower Domestic Services in Denver, offering positions as housemaids and companions for wealthy families back east. The letter mentioned they specifically sought women with no family ties, women who could travel immediately. Eli studied the information, his expression grim. A front organization. They're not recruiting housemaids. No, Ruby agreed. They're trafficking women. And Eli, the man I described, the one with soft hands, he had letterhead from this company. Then that's where we start. He looked at her across the table. Ruby, what I'm about to ask, you don't have to agree, but she already knew. You want me to make contact, to pretend I'm interested in their offer. It's dangerous. So is doing nothing while more girls disappear. He caught her hand. I won't lose you. Not now. You won't, she promised, though they both knew it might be a lie. But we're going to stop them. Eli, for Kate and Lily and all the others. We're going to stop them. Outside, Coal Dust Ridge went about its business, still buzzing with scandal, still divided over their former sheriff and his saloon girl. But in the small room above the laundry, two people who'd found each other against all odds planned their next move, knowing that the real danger was just beginning. The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Ruby would let word spread that she'd been dismissed from the Daisy Bell, easy enough to believe given recent events. She'd make herself visible at the train station, looking desperate, clutching a worn carpet bag, and when the soft-handed man or his associates approached, she'd take the bait. I don't like it, Eli said for the dozenth time, pacing his small room above the laundry. Too many variables. Too much can go wrong. Ruby sat at his table, calmly cleaning the small derringer he'd insisted she hide in her boot. We've been over this. They won't take me anywhere immediately. They'll need to arrange transport, gather other girls. That gives you time to follow. And if they search you, find the gun. Then I'll convince them it's for protection on the journey. She met his eyes. Eli, those girls trusted someone once. Kate probably thought she was getting a better life. We can't let it keep happening. He stopped pacing, bracing his hands on the table. Promise me you'll get out if it feels wrong? Don't be a hero, says the man who gave up his badge rather than compromise his principles. Ruby. She stood, moving around the table to wrap her arms around his waist from behind. I'll be careful, but this is our best chance. He turned in her embrace, holding her tight. They'd grown closer in the days since the fire, stolen moments between planning and investigation. Ruby had discovered that Eli was a terrible cook but made excellent coffee, that he hummed when he shaved, that he had nightmares about the war but slept peacefully when she was beside him. When this is over, he murmured into her hair, I want to take you away from here, somewhere nobody knows either of us. Start fresh. That sounds like a proposal. Mr. Ward. Maybe it is. He pulled back to look at her. Would that be so terrible? Ruby's heart stuttered. Ask me again when I'm not about to play bait for killers. 2 days later, the stage arrived from Denver. Ruby watched from the saloon window as passengers disembarked, and there he was, the pale-eyed man in the black coat, accompanied by a severe-looking woman in gray. He's here, she told Violet, who'd reluctantly agreed to the charade. That afternoon, Violet made a show of throwing Ruby out, shouting loud enough for half the street to hear about ungrateful girls who bring shame on establishments. Ruby played her part, begging, crying, finally stumbling away with her carpet bag. She made her way to the boarding house where she'd supposedly been staying since Eli lost his position, then to the train station to inquire about eastbound fares. The woman in gray appeared beside her as she studied the schedule board. Forgive my intrusion, the woman said, her voice cultured with a hint of Eastern European accent. But I couldn't help overhearing your distress earlier. You're seeking passage east? Yes, ma'am. Ruby let her shoulders slump. Though I'm afraid I don't have quite enough saved. Perhaps I can help. My employer, Mr. Hightower, occasionally assists young women in difficult circumstances, respectable positions with good families. The pay is generous, and travel expenses are covered. Ruby made herself look hopeful but wary. What kind of positions? Companions, housemaids, sometimes governesses for those with education. The woman studied her shrewdly. You can read, can't you? I can always tell. Yes, ma'am. My mother taught me before she passed. Excellent. Mr. Hightower prefers educated girls. They adapt better to refined households. She produced a calling card. I'm Mrs. Crane. We're staying at the Imperial Hotel. If you're interested, come by this evening. Bring your things. If Mr. Hightower approves, we could leave as soon as tomorrow." Ruby took the card with trembling fingers that weren't entirely feigned. "Thank you, Mrs. Crane. Thank you." She waited until the woman left before heading to Mrs. Chen's, where Eli waited in the kitchen, out of sight from the street. "The Imperial Hotel, tonight," she reported. "They want to leave tomorrow. I'll wire the marshal again. With any luck, he'll have men in position by no time." Ruby shook her head. "If we wait for official help, they'll be gone. You know how these operations work. They don't stay anywhere long." Eli's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Then we do this ourselves. I'll follow you to the hotel. Find a way to listen in." That evening, Ruby dressed carefully in her most modest dress, pinning her hair severely back. She looked young, vulnerable, desperate, exactly what predators like Hightower sought. The Imperial Hotel lobby was all red velvet and crystal, the finest establishment in Coal Dust Ridge. Ruby was directed to a private dining room where Mr. Hightower waited with Mrs. Crane and another man, younger, with cold eyes and a pistol barely concealed beneath his coat. "Miss Lark." Hightower rose, those pale eyes assessing her like merchandise. "Mrs. Crane speaks highly of your potential. You're very kind to see me, Mr. Hightower. Please, sit. Have you eaten?" The meal was surreal. Fine china and talk of Eastern mansions, while Ruby knew these people traded in human misery. She answered their questions carefully, painting herself as educated but naive, desperate but not damaged. Exactly the kind of girl who'd disappear without anyone important caring. "You understand," Hightower said over brandy he didn't offer her, "that these positions require complete dedication, no contact with former associates, a clean break from your past life." "I have nothing to keep me here," Ruby said truthfully. "And you're not encumbered? No followers? No gentlemen callers who might cause difficulties?" Ruby thought of Eli, probably listening from the adjoining room he'd bribed his way into. "No one." "Excellent." Hightower smiled, and it was like watching a snake unhinge its jaw. "Then we can—" The door burst open. Not Eli, the younger man from the train station, the one Violet had thrown out days ago for getting rough with the girls. "That's her," he pointed at Ruby. "That's the whore who got me kicked out. She's playing you, Hightower. Her and that sheriff been thick as thieves." Hightower's pale eyes went arctic. "Is this true, Miss Lark?" "I don't know what he means. She's lying." The man stepped closer, and Ruby recognized him now. Tom Morrison, a drifter who'd been asking too many questions about the girls. "Saw her myself with the sheriff just yesterday. This is a trap." The gunman's hand moved to his weapon. Mrs. Crane locked the door. Ruby's hand inched toward her boot. "How disappointing," Hightower said conversationally. "And here I thought you were clever. Jenkins, please deal with—" The window exploded inward. Eli came through in a shower of glass, his gun already drawn. "Nobody move." Jenkins was fast, but Ruby was desperate. She pulled the derringer and shot him in the shoulder as he drew on Eli. Morrison lunged for her, and she brought her knee up hard, sending him crashing into the china cabinet. "Ruby, down!" She dropped as Eli fired over her head, catching Mrs. Crane as she pulled a wicked-looking knife. The woman screamed, clutching her arm. Hightower hadn't moved, still seated calmly at the table. "Sheriff Ward, though I suppose it's just Mr. Ward now, you've caused considerable inconvenience." "Where are the girls?" Eli kept his gun trained on him. "Kate O'Brien, Lily Morgan, the others." "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean. I run a legitimate domestic service." Ruby stood, her derringer aimed at his head. "Lily couldn't read. I lied about the letter, but you knew that name, knew she was one of yours." For the first time, Hightower's composure cracked. "You little—" "The girls," Eli repeated. "Where are they?" Footsteps thundered in the hall. The door burst open again, revealing men with badges, the U.S., Marshals had arrived after all, if barely in time. Marshal Dixon, the lead man, surveyed the scene. "Got your wire. Ward, looks like you started without us." "These three are part of a trafficking ring," Eli said, not lowering his weapon. "The woman and the gunman tried to kill us. Morrison there is working with them. And Mr. Hightower was just explaining where to find the missing women," Ruby added sweetly. Hightower's laugh was bitter. "You think you've won. You have no idea how deep this goes. Those girls are long gone, shipped east or south. You'll never find them." "Maybe not," Marshal Dixon said. "But we'll find your records, your contacts, and we'll keep looking." He nodded to his men. "Take them." As the traffickers were led away in irons, Eli pulled Ruby into the hallway, running his hands over her to check for injuries. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Just some glass cuts. Eli, if he's telling the truth about the girls, we'll keep looking. The marshals will investigate. At least we stopped them from taking anyone else." Ruby leaned into him, exhaustion hitting as the danger passed. They'd done it. It wasn't perfect. Those missing girls still haunted her, but they'd stopped the predators, saved future victims. "Miss Lark," Marshal Dixon approached. "We'll need your statement, but I wanted to say, that was brave work. Ward's lucky to have you as a partner." "Partner. Not saloon girl, not fallen woman. Partner." "Thank you, Marshal." Dixon turned to Eli. "You know, we could use men like you in the Marshal service. The pay's better than sheriffing, and they don't much care who you marry as long as you get the job done." Eli's arm tightened around Ruby. "I'll think about it." Later, back in Eli's room above the laundry, Ruby sat while he carefully picked glass from her hair. The adrenaline had faded, leaving her shaky and overwhelmed. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "Jenkins would have shot you if I hadn't. We saved each other." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "That's what partners do." "Is that what we are?" Eli moved to face her, dropping to one knee beside the chair. "I'd like us to be more Ruby Lark. I know this isn't the time or place, but nearly losing you tonight made me realize I don't want to waste another day. Will you marry me?" Ruby stared at him, this good man who'd chosen her over everything, who saw her as a partner, an equal, who'd literally thrown himself through a window to save her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Eli Ward, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, full of relief and joy and promise. When they broke apart, he pulled something from his pocket, his late wife's ring, simple but beautiful. "I know it's not much. It's perfect." Ruby let him slide it onto her finger, where it caught the lamplight like captured fire. "You're perfect." "Hardly, but I promise to spend my life trying to deserve you." Outside, Coal Dust Ridge slept on, unaware that its former sheriff and a saloon girl had just toppled a trafficking ring and gotten engaged in the same night. There would be talk, Ruby knew, scandal and gossip and judgment, but wrapped in Eli's arms, wearing his ring, having fought beside him and won, she found she truly didn't care. They'd saved lives tonight, and in doing so, they'd saved each other too. The morning after their engagement, Ruby woke to find whore painted in red across the boarding house entrance. Mrs. Chen was scrubbing at it grimly, while neighbors gathered to stare and whisper. Ruby felt Eli tense beside her as they took in the scene from his window. "I'll talk to them," he said, already reaching for his boots. "No." Ruby caught his arm. "This is my fight too." They went down together, Eli's ring hidden beneath Ruby's glove. They'd agreed to wait before announcing their engagement, given the town's current mood. Mrs. Chen looked up as they approached, her weathered face sympathetic. "Not first time," she said simply. "Won't be last. Paint washes off." "Let us help," Ruby said, rolling up her sleeves. As they scrubbed, more townspeople gathered. Ruby heard the whispers, saw the pointed fingers, then something unexpected. Widow Henderson pushed through the crowd. "Bucket in hand. Many hands make light work," the old woman announced, joining them at the wall. One by one, others stepped forward. The schoolteacher, Miss Martinez, the Mexican women Ruby had helped feed, even some of the working girls from the Daisy Bell, defying Violet's orders to stay away. Not everyone, plenty still stood apart, faces hard with judgment, but enough. Enough to make Ruby's eyes burn with unshed tears. The wall was clean by noon, but the damage was deeper than paint. That afternoon, Eli received word that the town council had appointed a new sheriff, Chester Briggs, cousin to the man Eli had arrested weeks earlier, a man known for his rough handling of saloon girls and anyone else he deemed undesirable. "We need to leave," Eli said that evening, spreading a map across his small table. "The marshal's service job is in Denver. We could start fresh there." Ruby traced the route with her finger. Denver. A real city, where a woman's past might not follow so closely. "When?" "End of the week. I need to testify at Hightower's hearing first. Make sure those bastards don't slip away on technicalities." 3 days passed in tense preparation. Ruby gave notice at the Daisy Bell, enduring Violet's mixture of disappointment and maternal pride. She helped 2 younger girls compose letters to families back east, hoping to follow her example and leave the life. Eli sold what little he'd salvaged from the fire, secured their train tickets, and met repeatedly with Marshal Dixon to ensure the case against the traffickers was solid. On the 4th night, everything went wrong. Ruby was walking back from the seamstress. She'd commissioned a simple traveling dress, wanting something new for her new life, when they grabbed her, a flour sack over her head, rough hands dragging her into an alley. She fought, remembering Eli's lessons, but there were too many. When the sack came off, she was in a root cellar somewhere outside town. Chester Briggs leered down at her, flanked by 3 men she recognized as regular troublemakers. Well, the sheriff's whore. All alone. "I'm not—" A backhanded slap cut her off, splitting her lip. "Shut up. You cost my cousin his freedom, cost this town its dignity. Time someone taught you your place." Ruby spat blood. "Eli will kill you for this." "Your lover boy's got his own problems right about now." Briggs smiled coldly. Amazing how fast a building can burn when someone helps it along. Terror clawed at Ruby's throat. Not again, not Eli. "Course," Briggs continued, moving closer. "He might be too busy to burn if he's out looking for you. Shame you won't be found until it's too late. Lots of mine shafts in these hills. Dangerous for a woman to wander around alone." Ruby forced herself to think past the fear. The Derringer was gone. They'd searched her, but Eli had taught her other things. Wait for the right moment. Use their overconfidence against them. "Please," she whispered, letting tears come. "I'll leave town. Tonight. You'll never see me again." Too late for that. Briggs reached for her, and Ruby struck. She drove her knee up hard, doubling him over, then grabbed the lantern from the table and smashed it against the nearest man's head. Oil splattered, catching fire from the wick. In the chaos of flames and shouting, Ruby ran. The cellar door was barred from outside. Ruby threw her shoulder against it. Once, twice, feeling the old wood splinter. Behind her, Briggs roared orders over the spreading fire. The door gave way, and Ruby stumbled into the night. She was somewhere in the hills north of town, scrub brush and rocky ground treacherous in the darkness. Behind her, shouts and the glow of fire. They'd be after her soon, and they knew this terrain better. Ruby ran anyway, stumbling over rocks, sage tearing at her skirts. The moon was new, offering little light. She could hear pursuit now, horses, dogs. They were tracking her. A ravine opened before her, invisible until she was nearly over the edge. Ruby skidded to a stop, sending pebbles cascading into darkness. To her left, the barking grew closer. To her right, the land rose steeply, offering little cover. "There! I see her!" Gunfire cracked through the night. Ruby felt the bullet pass close enough to tug at her sleeve. She made her choice, sliding down into the ravine, using roots and rocks to control her descent. Her palms tore open, her dress shredded, but she reached the bottom alive. A seasonal creek bed, dry now but offering a path. Ruby ran along it, hoping the rocky ground would confuse the dogs. Her breath came in gasps. ribs aching from the fall. Behind her, men with torches descended more carefully. Then, hoofbeats ahead. Ruby's heart sank. They'd circled around, cut her off. She pressed against the ravine wall, looking for somewhere to hide, to make a final stand. "Ruby!" Eli's voice, raw with fear. Ruby nearly sobbed with relief. "Here! I'm here!" He came around the bend at full gallop, rifle in hand. In one smooth motion, he reached down and pulled her up behind him. Gunfire erupted from their pursuers, but Eli was already spurring his horse to climb the opposite bank. "Hold on!" Ruby wrapped her arms around him, feeling the bunch and strain of the horse's muscles as it scrambled up the steep slope. More shots. Closer now. Then they were over the edge and racing across the plateau. Other riders converging. Marshal Dixon and his men, drawn by the gunfire. The pursuit ended quickly after that. Faced with federal marshals, Briggs and his men surrendered, though not before trying to claim Ruby had started the fire herself. "Interesting theory," Dixon said dryly, taking in Ruby's torn dress, bloodied hands, and obvious injuries. "We'll be sure to add kidnapping and attempted murder to the charges. Ward, get your woman to the doctor." But Eli was already off his horse, running his hands over Ruby to check her injuries, his face gray with strain. "I thought I'd lost you," he said roughly. "When I found the boarding house on fire and you gone—" "The boarding house?" Ruby's legs gave out. Eli caught her, lowering them both to the ground. "Mrs. Chen." "Safe. We got everyone out. But Ruby, if Dixon hadn't already been riding out to find me—" She touched his face, feeling him tremble. "But we're alive. We're together. This is my fault. If I hadn't pursued you, hadn't made you a target—" "Stop!" Ruby kissed him, tasting dust and desperation. "Chester Briggs made his choices. You made yours. And I've made mine." Dawn was breaking by the time they returned to town. The boarding house still smoldered, another building lost to hate. But as Ruby emerged from the doctor's office, bandaged and stitched but whole, she found the street full of people. Not a mob this time. Supporters. Widow Henderson and Miss Martinez. The Mexican families. Mrs. Chen and her children. Even some of the more moderate townspeople who'd been shocked by Briggs's actions. They stood silent witness as Eli helped Ruby to the hotel where they'd taken temporary shelter. "Thank you," Ruby said simply, and meant it. That afternoon, as Ruby rested and Eli gave his statement to the marshals, an unexpected visitor arrived. Horace Pemberton, the banker who'd led the charge against them, stood in their hotel room doorway, hat literally in hand. "What do you want?" Eli's hand moved to his gun. "To apologize." The words seemed to physically pain him. "What Chester did was beyond the pale. This isn't what we intended when we challenged your position. Your intentions led directly to last night," Ruby said coldly from the bed. Pemberton flinched. "Yeah, I see that now. I've spoken with the council. If you want your position back, Sheriff Ward—" "I don't—" Eli's arm went around Ruby's shoulders. "We're leaving for Denver tomorrow. I've taken a position with the Marshal Service." "I see." Pemberton cleared his throat. "Then I wish you well, both of you. And Miss Lark, I'm sorry for my part in all this." After he left, Ruby and Eli sat in silence. It wasn't forgiveness, what Pemberton offered, but it was acknowledgement, perhaps, that she was more than what they'd tried to make her. "Are you ready to leave all this?" Eli asked quietly. Ruby looked around the hotel room, thought of the Daisy Bell, of Violet and the girls, of the few true friends she'd made. Then she looked at Eli, at the ring hidden beneath her bandages, at the future waiting in Denver. "I've been ready to leave for 10 years, she said. "I just didn't have anywhere to go. Now I do." He kissed her forehead gently, mindful of her injuries. "We both do." That night, Ruby wrote letters to Violet, thanking her for the harsh kindness that had kept her alive, to the girls she was leaving behind, encouraging them to believe in different futures, to Widow Henderson, promising to write from Denver, and finally, a note to be posted on the remnants of the boarding house wall, To those who showed kindness when it cost you something, thank you. To those who showed hatred, I forgive you. To those still trapped where I was, there is hope. Hold on to it with both hands. R.L. Tomorrow, she and Eli would board the eastbound train. There would be a quiet wedding in Denver. A new life where Deputy Marshal Eli Ward and his wife Ruby would face whatever came next together. The missing girls still haunted her, Kate and Lily and the others. But she'd done what she could. Sometimes that had to be enough. For tonight, though. Ruby Lark, soon to be Ruby Ward, sat in a hotel room with the man who'd chosen her over everything, and let herself believe in morning glories and second chances and love that saw past the surface to the soul beneath. It was more than she'd ever dared dream. And it was only the beginning. The train to Denver had barely cleared the Coal Dust Ridge station when Ruby heard the commotion from the next car. Shouts, a woman's scream, then gunshots. Eli was already moving, pushing her down between the seats. "Stay here," he ordered, drawing his weapon. But Ruby recognized that scream. She'd heard it before, in nightmares and memories she couldn't quite escape. As Eli moved toward the connecting door, she followed, ignoring his sharp gesture to stay back. In the next car, chaos. Passengers cowered in their seats, while a man in a familiar black coat held a young woman at gunpoint. Ruby's blood froze. The pale eyes, the soft hands. It was Boone Three Fingers Clay, the man who'd bought her 10 years ago and sold her to Violet when she grew too old for his particular tastes. And the woman he held, barely more than a girl, really, was Daisy from the Saloon. "Nobody moves," Boone shouted, his gun pressed to Daisy's temple. "This don't concern any of you." "Federal Marshal," Eli announced. Badge raised. "Release the girl and drop your weapon." Boone's laugh was ugly. "Marshal, is it? Well, Marshal, this here's my property. Bought and paid for. Got the papers right here." He gestured with his free hand to a document poking from his coat pocket. "She run off from me in Coal Dust Ridge, but I'm taking her back now. Slavery's been illegal for 20 years, Eli said evenly. "Whatever papers you have aren't worth the match to burn them. This ain't slavery, this is debt collection. Her daddy owed me $300. She's working it off." Ruby couldn't stay silent any longer. She stepped out behind Eli, and Boone's pale eyes widened in recognition. Well, Ruby Lark. Should have known you'd turn up. You always were too smart for your own good." His grip on Daisy tightened. "Remember when you were her age? So scared you shook like a leaf. But you learned. They all learn. Let her go, Boone." Ruby's voice was steadier than her hands. "You're outnumbered. There's nowhere to run. I got a hostage says different." He backed toward the rear door of the car, dragging Daisy with him. "I'm walking out of here with what's mine. Anyone follows, she dies." Ruby saw Eli calculating angles, but Boone kept Daisy between them, a human shield. The other passengers were frozen, terrified. Someone had to do something. "Take me instead," Ruby said. "Ruby, no," Eli started. "He doesn't want her," Ruby continued, eyes locked on Boone. "Not really. She's just money to him. But me, I'm the one who got away. The one who cost you when I convinced Violet not to buy from you anymore. Take me. Let Daisy go." Boone's eyes glittered with old rage and newer interest. "You offering to come willing? Be my good girl again?" Bile rose in Ruby's throat, but she nodded. "Let her go first. Ruby, you forbid nothing." She turned on Eli, letting him see her determination. "Trust me." Something in her eyes must have convinced him. His jaw clenched, but he lowered his weapon slightly. Boone shoved Daisy away. The girl stumbled forward, and Ruby caught her, whispering urgently in her ear. "When I move, you run. Understand?" Daisy nodded, tears streaming. Ruby straightened, walking slowly toward Boone. She could see his satisfaction, his anticipation. He thought he'd won, just like 10 years ago, when a 14-year-old girl had walked this same path toward him. But she wasn't 14 anymore. Ruby got within arm's reach and saw his attention shift, already contemplating his prize. She moved, a swift kick to his gun hand, sending the weapon flying. As he roared in pain and surprise, she drove her elbow into his solar plexus, then brought her knee up into his face as he doubled over. Boone went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. Ruby kicked him once more for good measure, and for the 14-year-old who hadn't known how to fight back. "That's for every girl you ever touched," she said. Eli was there instantly, restraining the semi-conscious Boone while another passenger retrieved the dropped gun. Ruby turned to find Daisy staring at her in awe. How did you?" "He taught me," Ruby said, nodding at Eli. "No one's property. Daisy, remember that." The rest of the journey to Denver passed in a blur of statements and telegraph messages. Boone was transferred to federal custody at the next station, facing charges of kidnapping, assault, and human trafficking based on evidence found in his coat. Not fake debt papers, but lists of girls he'd sold over the years, including dates and prices. Ruby's name was there. So were dozens of others. By the time they reached Denver, word had spread. A small crowd waited at the station. Law enforcement, certainly, but also members of the Ladies' Aid Society and other reform groups. Ruby shrank back, expecting judgment, but the women who approached wore expressions of sympathy and determination. Miss Lark, a dignified woman in her 50s, extended her hand. "I'm Margaret Ashford, president of the Colorado Women's Alliance. We'd like to speak with you about your experiences. If you're willing, there's legislation pending about protecting women from trafficking, and your testimony could make a real difference." Ruby looked at Eli, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, I'll help however I can." The next days were a whirlwind. Depositions, meetings, and through it all, planning a wedding. Eli had wanted to wait, to give Ruby time to recover from the train incident, but she refused. "I've waited my whole life to belong to myself," she told him. "I won't wait another day to belong with you." They married on a Thursday afternoon in a small church on the outskirts of Denver. Marshall Dixon served as witness, along with Mrs. Ashford and, surprisingly, Daisy, who decided to stay in Denver and take a position with a legitimate household, using the reading skills Ruby had taught her to better her situation. The ceremony was simple, but when Eli slipped his mother's ring onto Ruby's finger, his late wife's ring had been lost in the boarding house fire. She felt the weight of the moment, not just the joining of two lives, but the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said, and Eli did, thoroughly and with enough passion to make Mrs. Ashford clear her throat. "I love you, Mrs. Ward," he whispered against her lips. "And I love you, Deputy Marshal Ward," she whispered back. They honeymooned one night in a modest hotel, all they could afford on a deputy's salary. But Ruby wouldn't have traded it for a palace. She'd spent 10 years in fancy rooms with men she despised. This simple room with its clean sheets and the man she loved was paradise. Later, as they lay entwined, Eli traced the scars on her hands from her escape down the ravine. "Do they hurt?" "No, they're proof I fought back, that I survived." She turned in his arms. "Eli, there's something I need to tell you. About Boone, about what he did when I was younger." "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to." "I know, but I want to. No secrets between us." So she told him, about the fear, the pain, the ways she'd learned to disappear inside herself, about the other girls who hadn't survived, about the rage she'd carried for 10 years until she'd finally been able to strike back on that train. Eli held her through it all, his own tears mixing with hers. When she finished, he kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, soft, reverent touches that said what words couldn't. "You're the strongest person I know," he said finally. "I wasn't strong then. You survived. That took more strength than most people ever need." He pulled her closer. "And now you're helping other girls find their own strength. Daisy's free because of you. Those other girls on Boone's list might get justice because of you." Ruby thought about that list, all those names and dates. Kate O'Brien was on there, sold to an establishment in San Francisco. Still no word on her fate, but at least now they knew where to look. "The work's not done," she said. "No, but we'll do it together." A week later, they moved into a small house on the edge of Denver, 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it had a porch where morning glories could grow. Ruby planted the seeds herself, hands deep in earth that belonged to no one but herself and the man who'd helped her find her freedom. She took a position with the Women's Alliance, helping draft legislation and supporting other women escaping situations like hers. Eli threw himself into his marshal work, specializing in trafficking cases. Together, they built a life, but the past wasn't quite done with them. A month after their wedding, a letter arrived from California. Ruby's hands shook as she read it aloud to Eli. "Dear Ruby, I heard through mutual acquaintances that you've been looking for me. I'm alive, though there were times I wished otherwise. I'm writing to let you know I'm safe now, working as a seamstress in Sacramento. A church group helped me escape from where Boone sold me. I also write with warning. Boone had partners, men even worse than him. They know about you, about what you did. Be careful, be ready, and thank you. When I heard what you did on that train, how you fought back, it gave me hope that maybe we don't have to accept what they try to make us. Your friend, Kate O'Brien P.S.S. I'm learning to read properly now, remembering how you always said it would save us. You were right." Ruby set down the letter, meeting Eli's concerned gaze. "Partners," he said grimly. "We knew Boone wasn't working alone." "Let them come," Ruby said, surprising herself with the fierceness in her voice. "I'm not running anymore. I'm not hiding. We'll face them together." Eli took her hand, the one wearing his ring, and brought it to his lips, an echo of that first gentle kiss that had started everything. Together, he agreed. Outside, the first green shoots of morning glories pushed through the soil, reaching for the sun. New life, new hope, new strength. Ruby Ward stood on her own porch, her husband's arm around her, and watched the sunset paint the mountains crimson. She'd thought her life was worth only one night's price, but love had transformed it into something worth fighting for, worth building day by day. The threats would come. Kate's letter made that clear. But Ruby had learned to fight back, to stand tall, to claim her place in the world. And she'd never stand alone again. 1 year had passed since Ruby and Eli Ward made their home on the outskirts of Denver. The morning glories now climbed the porch posts in abundant cascades of blue and purple, just as Ruby had once dreamed. She stood at the kitchen window, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly, watching her husband split firewood in the yard. The pregnancy had come as a shock, after years in the life. Ruby had assumed her body was too damaged to carry a child, but Dr. Morrison, a kind woman who served the Women's Alliance, had confirmed it 3 months ago. "Your body is stronger than you know," she'd said gently. "What you survived didn't break you. It just bent you for a while." Now, at 6 months along, Ruby felt the baby move within her, tiny flutters that still took her breath away. She'd just placed a protective hand over the movement when she saw Eli stiffen, his head turning toward the road. A rider approached at full gallop. Marshal Dixon, his face grim beneath the dust of hard travel. Ruby met them on the porch, her heart already sinking. They'd had 6 months of peace since Kate's warning letter. She'd known it couldn't last. "They found Boone dead in his cell this morning," Dixon said without preamble. "Throat cut. Guard was paid to look the other way." His partners. Eli said, "It wasn't a question. Cleaning up loose ends. And there's more." Dixon pulled out a crumpled paper. This was pinned to his body. Ruby read the message, her blood chilling. "The whore and her lawman are next. Jay, yes. Jay." Eli took the paper, studying it. "Could be anyone," Dixon admitted. "But Ruby, I need to ask, was there anyone else from your past? Anyone who worked with Boone who might— Josiah Sweet." The name came out as a whisper. Ruby sank onto the porch bench, memories flooding back. "He was worse than Boone. Boone was about money, but Sweet enjoyed the pain. He disappeared about 5 years ago. Everyone thought he'd been killed in a range war. Apparently not. Eli sat beside her, taking her hand. "Tell us everything you remember." So Ruby did, haltingly, about the man who'd made even hardened outlaws nervous. His particular cruelty toward the youngest girls, the scars he left, inside and out. How he'd once told her he'd come back for her someday, that she was unfinished business. "We'll post guards," Dixon said when she finished. "Move you to a safe house." "No." Ruby stood, steel in her voice. "I won't run. I won't hide. I have a life here, work that matters. Girls who need my help at the Alliance. I won't let him take that from me. Ruby, the baby. We'll have parents who stood their ground." She met Eli's worried gaze. "We knew this was coming. We prepare. We stay alert. But we don't stop living." The next weeks were tense. Eli insisted on teaching Ruby to shoot properly, not just the close-range work she'd learned before. She proved a natural marksman, channeling her fear into focus. The Women's Alliance rallied around her, creating a network of safe houses and watchful eyes. Even some of Eli's fellow marshals volunteered off-duty hours to patrol their neighborhood. It was a Tuesday evening when it finally happened. Ruby was alone. Eli had been called to testify in a trial. Wouldn't be back until late. She'd insisted she'd be fine, that the deputies watching the house were enough. She was reading in the parlor when the lamp flickered. "Just wind," she told herself. Then came the creak from the kitchen, the loose floorboard near the back door that Eli kept meaning to fix. Ruby's hand went to the Colt .45 on the side table, Eli's gift to her. "I know you're there," she called out, proud when her voice didn't shake. "The house is surrounded by lawmen. Give yourself up." Low laughter drifted from the darkness beyond the doorway. "Little Ruby, lying just like I taught you. The deputies are indisposed. It's just you and me, the way it should have always been." Josiah Sweet stepped into the light, and Ruby's breath caught. 5 years had not been kind to him. His face bore the marks of hard living and violence, one eye milky white from an old injury. But his remaining eye burned with the same cruel hunger she remembered. "You've grown up pretty," he said, his gaze traveling over her. "Pregnant, too. His? My husband's. Yes, husband." He spat the word. "Playing house, pretending you're respectable. But I know what you really are. What I made you." "You made me a survivor," Ruby said, rising slowly, keeping the table between them. The gun was steady in her hand. "Nothing more. I made you mine." He moved closer, and Ruby saw the knife in his hand, long, wicked, stained with what might have been blood. "Boone was weak, selling you off, but I never forgot. When I heard what you'd done, testifying against your betters, sending good men to prison, I knew it was time to collect what's owed. I owe you nothing. You owe me everything." His control cracked, rage flooding his scarred features. 10 years I've waited. 10 years of planning how I'd teach you your place again. And now you're carrying his brat? No, that ends tonight." He lunged across the table. Ruby fired, the shot catching him in the shoulder, spinning him back. But he kept coming, the knife sweeping toward her belly. She threw herself sideways, crying out as she landed hard on her side. Sweet loomed over her, knife raised. "Should have stayed a good girl. Ruby!" The front door exploded inward. Eli burst through, already firing. His first shot took Sweet in the chest, the second in the head. The outlaw was dead before he hit the floor. "Ruby!" Eli was beside her in an instant, hands checking her for injuries. "I'm all right. The baby!" she gasped as a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. "No, something's wrong." The next hours blurred together, the frantic ride to doctor, Morrison's, Eli carrying her when the pain grew too intense to walk. The doctor's calm voice fighting through Ruby's panic, the terrible fear that after everything, she would lose this too. But as dawn broke over Denver, Ruby held her daughter in her arms. Tiny, perfect, arriving a bit early but strong, so strong. "She's beautiful," Eli whispered, one finger gently touching the baby's cheek. "What shall we call her?" Ruby looked at their daughter, born from violence but into love. entering the world fighting just like her mother. "Hope," she said. "Hope, Elizabeth Ward." "Hope," Eli repeated, and kissed them both. The story of Sweet's death and Hope's dramatic birth spread quickly. The newspapers painted Ruby as a heroine, the reformed woman who'd fought off her past to protect her unborn child. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough to shift public opinion. Letters poured in from women across the territory, sharing their own stories, asking for help. 6 months later, Ruby stood before the Colorado State Legislature, Hope balanced on her hip. The baby played with Ruby's testimony papers, babbling happily as her mother spoke about the need for stronger laws protecting women from trafficking. "I was sold at 14, Ruby said, her voice carrying through the chamber. "For 10 years, I was property. But I stand before you today as proof that our past does not define our future. Every woman deserves the chance I was given, to reclaim her life, to find love, to raise her children in freedom." The legislation passed overwhelmingly. That evening, Ruby and Eli sat on their porch, Hope asleep between them. The morning glories had bloomed again, their faces turned toward the setting sun. "Do you ever regret it?" Eli asked quietly. "The danger I brought into your life. Sweet might never have found you if not for the attention from the trials." Ruby considered this, then shook her head. "He would have come eventually. Men like that don't forget what they think they own." She touched Hope's downy hair. "But because of you, I was ready. I could fight back. I wasn't alone. Never alone again." Eli promised, taking her hand. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Inside the house, a letter waited on Ruby's desk, from Kate O'Brien, now running a school for former working girls in Sacramento. Tomorrow, Ruby would write back, sharing the news that 2 more trafficking rings had been broken up thanks to their testimonies. But tonight, she simply held her family close. The girl who'd once been worth only a single night's price had become a wife, a mother, a voice for the voiceless. The journey had been dark and difficult, but it had led her here, to this porch, these morning glories, this love that had transformed everything. "I thought my life would be just one night," Ruby murmured, echoing the words she'd spoken a year ago. "But you turned it into a lifetime." Eli kissed her temple. Hope stirred between them, and the morning glories rustled in the evening breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, not a sound of escape anymore, but of connection, of lives being changed, of women finding their way to freedom. Ruby Lark Ward closed her eyes and smiled. She was home. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Ruby and Eli's journey. Your support helps us bring more of these historical romances to life.